Hello, everyone, and welcome to your Wednesday Four Lads show. My name is Stevie Clifford. I'm joined by Kenny Stewart as we talk all things Rangers for another episode of Talk Rangers. Kenny, how are you today, mate? You well?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I hope you're well too.
Yeah, we. This isn't the first time we've tried to record this intro,
Nope.
so we're going to try and power on because last time it didn't work. So it's going well. When Andrew Anderson isn't here, everything goes to pot. But Kenny, we've chosen to talk about the AGM. AGM obviously coming up. It feels like it's more prevalent than other years. It feels like there's a lot of things that we should be asking. We say this, and we've said it in the past, but it somewhat feels like this AGM has got a wee bit more to it than others.
It has. The club's went into meltdown over the last year or so, hasn't it? It's really been in a little bit of a free fall. So when it comes to that AGM, I would hope that shareholders make their questions, important questions, put it that way, that need answered. That's what I would be saying, Stevie. I think it's imperative that we get a kind of picture of the future and where the football club's going. Don't know if you agree, but that would be my take on it.
I absolutely agree. I think there also needs to be a level of accountability from those sitting on that podium, and I think they don't need to explain, right? I don't think that's right because they'll tell you they don't was an explanation for anything, and
Yeah.
they're biggest shareholders and everything else. But as a fan base, I feel that we are a major shareholder in this too, because without us and without our money every year, you don't function the way you should. And I've got to be honest, Kenny, I'm looking for a level of accountability. I'm not looking for them to stand up there and say, you know, everything's our fault. I'm looking for them to stand up and say, this is what we've learned from the last year. This is what we've learned from these certain things. This is what we're doing in the future to ensure we're never back in the same place again. And there needs to be an explanation about some of the decisions that have been made over the course of the year. And I generally don't feel that's unreasonable.
No, things like the Copeland Road fiasco over the summer there, Stevie, that uh, fans deserve an explanation to that about how that decision can be made, and to explain that the company that they normally get to do building work refused this work, didn't take it because it felt that the time scale, the time frame was wasn't going to happen. So they went with somebody else. And how much has that cost? The damage to the football club, how much has that cost? The accounts show a 17 million plus loss, when we had our previous chairman the entire year saying £10 million losses can't be sustainable. Well, if you go 70% above that, that does lead to fans demanding accountability, not so much asking for it, Stevie. For me, that these kind of things are beyond concerning when you've got a guy running a football club who's saying, well, the chairman of the football club saying these things, and then as he leaves due to ill health, a month later we announce never mind £10 million losses, £17 million losses. Then now that needs explained, because when you look into those accounts, as you and Andy had done, last month, the future doesn't look great for next season either in terms of the finances. So, that's all I would say, Stevie. That I would hope that shareholders do make this AGM a kind of watershed point for the investors in this football club and the board that they have in place. I don't know. Again, I don't know what you feel on that, but that would be my take on it. There's a number of things that need clarified to support us.
Yeah, so we've picked out what we feel is some questions that should be asked. And first thing people are going to ask is, well, Stevie, why aren't you asking them? First of all, the AGM this year comes and I am in America, so I will not be present. We will have people there kind of giving you an outline on it, and there will be an AGM special pod that night, so we'll be able to find out a wee bit more in depth. So these are questions that we feel are relevant and we feel that should be asked. First one, Kenny, you've touched on it slightly. Copeland Road, how much financially has it damaged the football club? and including cost of hiring Hampden, costs of missing out on Europe and all that kind of stuff. And is the fiasco that unfolded the reason for potentially not doing the works planned on the Broom loan next season? Because obviously that's, from what we know, shelved. I'd like to get some clarity on that as well. But I think we should, I think it's worth an explanation to the support on how it was so badly handled and why it's ended up costing so much. Why, like you said, the rumours of big businesses turning it down, big construction sites. It was very early on. It was rumoured. I remember within the first couple of weeks hearing people saying, this isn't going to be ready in time. And now we're, and it took months before it properly came out. How did the chairman not know what was going on ground level? Why did we not have people at ground level? How was it so badly mismanaged? I think that is, first of all, I think that's probably one of the most relevant questions to ask.
I totally agree. It's one of those kind of scenarios that if you look back at that time, Stevie, and just before the work started, we lost our CEO. There was a real lack of direction or leadership across the football club. As you say, John Bennett, I believe he lives in London, doesn't he? So he wasn't on the ground, as you say. But it's, to me, it's one of these things, Stevie, that you look at, and I'm not trying to be dramatic about this, but just about every decision that could be made at board level over the last year has been a bit of a controversial or a wrong one, put it that way. And to me, when you look at, the likes of, as you say, that the works on the Broomloan for next season, they have literally been shelved. They've turned around and said, we're not quite so sure that will happen. Which, when they're already saying that, last month, that it's not going to happen. I think they're pretty certain that's not going to happen. And that's another one for me, as I said, that, this is directly impacting on supporters, on fans going into the ground. And it's one of these things that, again, I'm not 100% how you feel about this, but the lack of information that, when this was all happening with the Copeland, was a concern to me, that there was no dialogue at all with fans, at almost a certain degree. This is what's going to happen right at the last minute. We're going to Hampden, then it will be open on a certain day, and things like that. That this is part of the problem for me with the football club in general at that board level, is that we don't have that leadership, and I would like to see that question asked. Why is it taking so long for the investors to find a CEO to replace James Bisgrove? And I understand all these things about big business, and you've got a notice period, and this has been 7 months now, Stevie, with the man that effectively leads and runs your football club, your chief executive officer, and we don't have one. And I know John Gilligan and George Latham are doing a great job, and fair play to them for stepping up. But this is not what you expect of Rangers, is it? And this is why I feel this AGM is probably the most important in a decade. I don't know what you feel, but it's probably the most important one in a decade.
Yeah, I think the CEO question is obviously very relevant, it probably comes into a lot of other positions at the club, the likes of Jeb Jacobs, Craig Robertson, medical staff about to leave. My problem with the current issues at the club, CEO hunt kind of highlights that, is that it's taken so long to do everything. There is no successive plan. There is nobody saying, right, if James does go tomorrow, here's a guy that we want in, here's a short list of 3. Just like any good football club, if your right back's coming to the end of his career or the striker stops scoring goals, you start getting a list together, don't you, of players that could potentially, replace him. And I think that we've been caught with our pants down, to be brutally honest, when it comes to James Bisgrove. And it shouldn't have been a surprise, because James's departure was being talked about another 6 weeks before. It was getting talked about at the turn of the year. So that shouldn't be. I think I would like an explanation on the hiring strategy, why it's taken so long, why there seems to be nobody from the outset that kind of just grabs the situation, bull by the horns kind of thing, and says, right, this is how we're going to appoint it. We want a new appointment within 3 months. That the St Mirren chase for Gillespie was quite embarrassing. Turns out he turned it down, etc. I found that quite mortifying. So there needs to be an accountability about how we got there. So along with the stadium, the CEO, I think are relevant questions, Kenny. But moving on, again, you touched on it slightly, but the accounts, £17.2 million losses, entirely unsustainable. I suppose the reply would be that it is sustainable if the shareholders are willing to mop that up, which they seem to be doing. But next year's accounts already look like they're heading in that trajectory because it doesn't include Europe, Kiev, which James Taylor spoke about. It includes the hiring of Hampden and things like that. So we're back to this question where we were a couple of years ago. At what point do investors and board believe sustainability, break-even profit will eventually materialise? And they're going to go on about the 4 pillars and things like that. But it goes back to me to a question Douglas Park was asked by Club 1872, and they said, what is your plan for the future of Rangers, short and long term? And he looked bewildered and simply mumbled, to win as many games as possible. And that has turned out to be, at the time, everybody felt he looked uncomfortable and he didn't really have an idea of what was going on. 3 years on, arguably, the accusations that they didn't have a plan and they are just stumbling through are really relevant when you see account results and losses and things like that. So the accounts and that level of loss is another massive question for this board.
Of course it is. And, Andy McKellar has pointed that out, that on the 5 transfers out the way in the summer, note 30 in the account says 0.8 million, pounds received. And I mean, what's going on with that? That needs kind of addressed, doesn't it? That's a strange situation. But on these accounts, and you saying that about the investors, as long as they're prepared to kind of soak that up, and is that fair to turn around and say you're making mistakes? It's your mistakes that are causing these losses to a certain degree. And when I say it's not individual mistakes, just as a club, they're making these mistakes. The transfer policy over the last couple of years has been appalling. The transfers in, transfers out, or players out, never mind transfers out, have been quite embarrassing if you look at it. I think there's been 11 players that departed, under freedom of contract. The contract had ran down. That's bizarre for any football club to find themselves in that position. But our signing policy and this player trading model, that those 4 pillars that you're talking about, and that being the 4th and final pillar, well, that pillar has barely got a foundation or a brick put on it yet, really, if we're being honest. But minus Calvin Bassey, we just haven't managed to do that at all, have we? I mean, when you actually look at it, it's actually quite a farce. It's a farcical situation to find yourself in as Glasgow Rangers, that you can't sell a decent player for a decent amount of money.
Yeah, I think another question within that question is what you highlighted, the 0.8 million received for transfers going out. And when you think about Lammers, Goldson, McCrory, etc., who went out in the summer, to not receive, Todd Cantwell, chuck him in there as well, to receive that amount of money, I think that needs some explanation as well. And is that right? Are we to receive more in the future? Where are we with that? The way Andy reads it is that it doesn't appear to be. So Andy is an expert in these fields. I am not. But that is concerning to me, Kenny, that those could leave the door. So a question within the question, I think another question for the investors is something relevant to ask them. What are the plans for future investment? Do they intend to seek external investment? Are they here for the long haul? If so, what are the intentions and what do they see the club in 3 to 5 years? Because there doesn't seem to be a business plan, and that touches slightly on what we said before. You know, how much money are they willing to invest? At what point are they going to say we're not sustaining the losses, etc., etc.? You know, where are we with that challenge?
Well, if you call the investors an investment team, right? You know, what? Surely to goodness, the guys with this kind of money that you're investing into a business, you must have some kind of idea of the infrastructure of the football club, what's required as a business to make it successful. These are all successful guys in their own right, in their own field. So I question why you've got those X amount of investors putting money in, making mistakes, putting more money in to cover those mistakes. I don't understand why any business, never mind a football club, where the nature of that business is what happens on the football pitch, but what happens on the park. Now, you could look at it all and say the women's team are doing quite well. The B team is, you know, the infrastructure. Is it properly in place? Things like that. And for me personally, I that would be my most important question at an AGM. Would be to turn around and say to the chairman and that board, where do you see Rangers in 3 years? Where do you see them in 5 years? What do you feel is required to get us winning this league title? Is it, you know, is it just Europe that is sustaining us at this minute in time? You know, is there a question about what happens if we don't qualify for the Europa League? Where does that leave us there? These are questions that this board should know. They should be able to answer at a drop of a hat, you know. And this is my concern, Stevie, that I personally don't feel at all that these investors and the board they've put in place have a clue about what the overall plan is, because you really are in a situation here where you have a successful football club across the city that are building for the future, and we don't seem to be at this minute in time. And that for me is one of those things that, as I said, is probably the single most important question to ask this board. What is the plans for the next few years? And get it laid out in black and white for us, because I'll ask you, how do you feel about that? That we just seem to be meandering along, don't we? But we're not really looking to the future. It's almost like one day at a time at this board level.
I think it's impossible not to think that when we struggle to replace people that are going out the door, the left hand doesn't seem to know what the right hand are doing. You speak to so many people. I think there's been something like 35 staff departures out of 180 in the last couple of years, which you know, a fifth of your workplace. It doesn't show a happy working environment. It doesn't show a thriving place to be. I think a lot of people are there because they're Rangers fans. And I think something else that we need to kind of figure out is, I don't know about you, Kenny, but over the summer, we have to sell before we can buy, and we needed people out. It was such a bad narrative that was being created. I'd like to know what their transfer funds and how they plan to improve this team, which undoubtedly needs it. It's a massive job for Coppin and Clermont, etc. But they have to do it, and they have to find a way to back him, and they have to find a way to do it. So another question within that question again would be, how do you plan to do it? But I think that brings us on nicely to Clermont and Coppin, recently both given contract extensions. I'd like to know, or I suppose I wouldn't like the question around that. What is the logic in those new contracts and those extra promotion? I think you would call it for Coppin going up to technical director and that. Who's making these decisions when you've got a boardroom that wouldn't step into the chairman's shoes? They all refused, and we had to get a friend from the outside to come in and do it. So with no CEO, who's responsible for making these decisions Why were the decisions made? Are the rumours that both of them threatened to leave, are they true? And were they basically given sweeteners to stay? I think these are legitimate questions for the board to answer also. And perhaps even Clement and Coppin will answer it themselves.
Yeah, and this comes down, again, Clement being given a contract. I can understand that one to a certain degree. Okay, very quickly here we'll go. Where he basically admitted in the summer that this was not the job he expected to be taken on. So the goalposts had been moved for him to a certain degree. I think the lack of funds was quite apparent in the summer. Going back to Andy's point about that 0.8 million on Niels Coppin, that looks like a fire sale to me. Get them off the wage bill as quickly as you can. Get them off this wage bill this summer. Coppin being promoted is a strange one for me because, and this is, I don't know the guy, I've never met him, and I'm not entirely convinced with the signings we've made since he turned up. I think the overall standard of the squad at this minute in time is probably worse than it was last season, and last season's squad wasn't good enough. So you have to look at that and say, well, why is he being promoted and given more responsibility? And again, I'm going to be honest about it, Stevie. I genuinely believe this smacks a little bit of desperation. That the investors, the board that they have in place, are fully aware that they do not know anything about football. Now, it's taken them this long to understand that, but they don't have a clue about football, and they need football men in there. And if those football men that are running that side of the club are threatening to leave, then you will go out your way to try and keep them, won't you? It's a kind of natural human reaction to that. It's just human nature to turn around and say, right, we want to keep this little bit of stability that we have got. But I can't for the life of me figure out why they've given Coppin this technical director job, or when the sporting director, whatever it is they're calling it at this minute in time, purely on the basis yet again across the board we keep doing this, Stevie, that we are employing people, promoting them to do a job that they've never done before, and it's over and over and over again. This has been going on for a number of years, and you have to ask yourself why is it that our football club seems to be the only one, out there that does this?
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fair. I think the other question surrounding that is, a year ago, Niels Coppin was a scout at PSV.
Yeah.
He then went to head of recruitment, which he should have been in for a number of years before we looked at that feasibly and said, is he doing a good job? And we can realistically have a look at it. He's not been in it long enough for us to figure out if he is. I think finally, Kenny, one of the other questions, what are we doing about this B team? Because we've got a number of players at that level who aren't playing regular competitive games. They aren't in the league. We've spoke about it for years now, about how this shambles isn't getting fixed. Niels Coppin spoke a wee bit about having, link-ups with other teams. So how far are we to doing that? And what is the situation with the B team? Is it improving? Because we talk about this player training model and getting youths into our first team. How can we do that if they're not playing?
Well, I come from an era, Stevie, I've mentioned this before, that part of Rangers sustainability many years ago was to sell kids on for 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 pounds all the time, and it all adds up. And if you've got a B team or a youth system that effectively doesn't have a team in a league, they're not playing competitive football, there is no pathway, no realistic pathway from the youth academy to that first team. And with the way the first team is performing at the minute, there's no way Clement is going to turn around and promote these kids and give them huge amounts of game time, because he needs results. So that in itself is a real issue for me, where, we took the team out of the Lowland League, didn't we? And in the last year or year and a half now, we've been sitting playing, glamorised friendlies. That's all it is. I just don't believe for a minute that your boys like Curtis and Lovelace are going to progress to the level required playing at that level, Stevie. I don't see how you can, as a player, grow as a man if you're sitting playing an under-21 team or an under-23 team. You know, and that is another issue that, again, is really important to me in terms of the football club, is that youth academy, and what is it we're actually doing with it, because we're investing plenty of money in it with zero return. And as I say, I go back to my initial point there about when I was a teenager in my 20s and stuff like that, we'd probably make about £1 million a year, £1.5 million a year on just selling kids. And that pretty much makes the youth academy self-sustainable, doesn't it? If you do that, and we're incapable of doing that at the way that we're going about it just now. And I don't know what you think again on that, but that's kind of my feel on it. Is I don't know what we're doing there.
Yeah, like so many other kind of facets of the club, I think, Kerry, that it does seem like it's left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. But I think we'll leave it there. We've discussed a number of questions for the AGM. What would you like to see asked, folks? Get your questions in. Let us know what you would ask, and I'd love to hear your comments. This AGM, every year it threatens to be a bigger one. I think this year it might just be, and there might just be a few uncomfortable questions for the board. We're not here to haul them over coals and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, they are the ones, the custodians at the moment, who are in charge of this football club. And whilst they have invested a lot, so does every single match day punter who buys season tickets, European packages, tops, left, right, and centre, away trips, everything. We're all entitled to ask relevant questions of this football club, where it's going, who's in charge, who's making the decisions, and what we're doing from there. By the time this comes out in a couple of days' time, we might already have got a CEO. We might already have made a chairman appointment, which would be typical of us. But at this moment in time, these questions are all relevant in terms of where we're going and what we're doing. Kenny, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining us, mate.
No, thank you. And if you're any shareholder at the AGM, use your question wisely, is what I would say. Make it worthwhile. And thanks for having me on, Stephen. That was good.
As always, folks, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate this. It's a new platform. Relatively just started at the start of the year, and the support has been incredible. So we appreciate it, Kenny and I. This is a new show, just a couple of pals getting together to talk about relevant Rangers issues. So we thank you for joining us. We'll speak to you again soon.